Hello to everybody there. I'm very grateful that I can share with you this presentation since I cannot be there in person. This presentation is about architecture beyond the built form, understanding and imagination. The aim of this presentation is to reveal the importance of a deeper understanding of space and place prior to the design process. It also aims to reveal the importance of the role of the architect, irrespectively of drawing and modeling tables, but mostly connected to the world of text and language. As a student of architecture myself, I soon realized during my undergraduate studies in Great Britain, as is also the case elsewhere, that studio work is based on assignments, projects related to urban narratives as tools for imagining spaces and eventually create meaningful living spaces. Later on, working as an architect, I realized that the same was true regarding the importance of narrative into my work when presenting my work to clients and sharing common metaphors of their own life integrated into an architectural narrative, which was deeply related with the place and landscape of the given site and environment. The Book of Fabulations, Storytelling in Architecture, reveals Frascari's exploration of architecture as an art that seeks an expansion of architectural potential, integrating poetry and technique so as to engender, it may be hoped, fabulous buildings. Teaching recently the course Understanding and Imagination Before Designing at the School of Architecture of the University of Thessaly in Greece, and also a contemporary urbanism course, Athens Through Time, Space and Narrative, in CYA, a Studies Abroad program in Athens, allowed me to explore how the process of narrating and creating fictional narratives of space and place create a different understanding of what life is, in addition to creating a stable ground for the imagination to rely upon and flourish. Understanding Before Designing, a course on a farming landscape. Understanding and Imagination Before Designing is a course which is based on a case study on the traditional architecture of a village on the Cycladic island of Tinos. The course analyzes life in the village through the creation of a file with a collection of observations, texts, interviews, narratives, stories that the new architects should be aware of in this space before beginning to imagine and creating a new piece of architecture in the traditional structure of a village or any other small community. What should an architect know beyond thinking or designing the structure of a building in order to analyze and understand an existing spatial and social situation in depth? In architectural theory, tools of interpretation are given through different approaches so that architecture and art can be understood as practices that were traditionally used to connect man with his community, place, religion, and environment. But how are they implemented? By examining 12 different spatial and social situations, the course sought to reveal the following: the structure of the society and the traditional village structure and its relationship with myth, the history of its construction, the basis on which the architect should use his or her imagination before implementing a new piece of architecture within this complex structure. In the course, extracts of narratives, contracts, maps, photographs, and videos were used so that the students can consolidate their understanding of the different issues of village life. This course aims at a deep understanding of the village, place, the different materials used, the spaces in which everyday life takes place. Moreover, it seeks to explore the relationship between theory and design through the interpretation of the metaphors related to local spaces and culture and the way the locals use them or perceive them. The students were able to bring to the foreground all the above through fictional narratives that they wrote as part of the course. Each narrative was followed by verbal narration and interpretation based on the spatial organization of the village, with a hermeneutical intention to reveal another reality of the village life. Narrative and Imagination, a course on urban landscapes. Athens Through Time-Space Narrative course investigates Athens as a city evolving in time, bringing together historic and contemporary architecture, as well as spaces of the communal, public, and private realm. The course is addressed to students from American universities and different departments during a semester of studies in Athens Studies Abroad program. The purpose of the course is to reveal the complexity of the Mediterranean metropolis by asking students to create their own narratives about the city based on an archive of observations, photographs and images, sketches and records. They will then be asked to write their own stories about the city through their experience and understanding of the city's places and urban spaces. The course is composed of lectures followed by related field trips, single and group assignments which help them see and imagine city life in Athens. It focuses on the Athenian landscape and its environs, on the social, cultural, and urban fabric, in order to shed light on the boundaries and spaces of crisis, migration, but also of negotiations and coexistence as this takes place between the ancient and the new, between the center and the edges of the city. During the process of research before teaching these courses, I realized that through listening and creating stories from the citizen's life in urban or even farming landscapes, space and landscape consist of a series of metaphors on the nature of dwelling in every part of the world, in specific urban or farming landscapes, but still connected to contemporary life or tradition past as a mimetic action to the present time. The students of this course created their own narratives based on metaphors of Athenians, on their reality in the city, fused by their personal experience in the city as a variation of truth. During the study and experience, I kept in mind the relevance and discovery of truth through fiction, story, myth, as argued by the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, who claims that what has to be questioned is the overly simple equation made between life and experience. A life is no more than a biological phenomenon as long as it has not been interpreted. This made me realize, as he further explains, the mediating role of fiction as a weaving procedure of different things that make up life. Perez Gomez makes an even stronger claim in this direction, according to which metaphor is more than the master figure of speech. It is a central form of linguistic expression for an active consciousness once it finds itself facing external reality. It is an articulation of truth in the manner of the Greek aletheia, Heidegger's revealing, concealing, that must take place of truth as correspondence, as normative for human understanding. Imagination appears common both for language as narrative, fiction, story, and architecture. Through fiction, students brought together understanding and imagination and were able to root their experience and observations in the space of the city. 3 foreigners and an opening day. Extract from fictional narrative on the village of Campos. Extract from a fictional narrative from personal research on a Cycladic village. Kira Anna covered her head with a colorful scarf and said goodbye to the other ladies. She wanted to visit Xenula at the museum and hear the news about this month's opening and celebrations. No sooner had she wrapped up her hair with her scarf than Eleni stopped her. "Where are you going? Sooner or later, the villagers will arrive to decide about the church's land." Holy Trinity's land? Answered Kiraana with an expression of surprise. Ah, you weren't there last Saturday at the church when the priest announced that Mr. Zana, the museum's artist, asked for private use of the adjacent land in the museum, which belongs to the church. So the priest informed the parish committee, and the committee invited all the villagers to decide whether to grant the request. Kiriana left the church courtyard and immediately turned left, passing by the most remote part of the village, where the doors of the houses were closed in the previous summer and the cellars looked forlorn and empty. She passed under the old vaulted archway and left the old stables on her left and the beautiful old and luxurious house of Philippus's family, where the wild artichokes and fig trees had grown big to the point of covering most of the garden. She then turned right towards the house of Mr. Zana. The artist had refurbished the house a few years ago. She passed underneath the vaulted archway that supported Mr. Zana's newly refurbished courtyard that also formed its entrance door. A few steps further, she opened the old gate at the end of the passage under the vaulted archway. She walked through Simo's courtyard and the small open space which was formed by stratis and Antoni's thresholds, courtyards and houses. Thereon, she followed the alleyway that connected this area to the big set of steps that ended in an equally small open space formed by the front of Stratis' house, including those of Nikiforos and Katerina. She stepped down the last steps and leaned against the wall and the house that now had become part of the new museum's courtyard. The in-between spaces in the village and its landscape, where conflict and solidarity coexist as places of dwelling and negotiation, revealed to me the importance of language for understanding the meaning of these spaces as private or communal, but also as deeply rooted ways of dwelling. Dwelling is fully engaged with the environment which is still imposed by nature's forces, the religious and ethical order as part of a traditional community life within both the private and public realm. This psychosomatic equilibrium connected to human relations, the environment and architecture, and the village atmosphere, and conveyed through language in these and 7 more fictional narratives. In this study, used also in previous courses, a series of old contracts which reflect a perception of the value of land and property connected with the land's production and cultivation, convey a pre-poetical, pre-hermeneutical description. This represents another anthropological description of the place given so as to be reconstructed under different situations and conditions. There is actually a series of interpretations from contracts and interviews to fiction, then the interpretation of the fictional narrative. Then phenomenology and hermeneutics can help to understand and interpret these spaces, which are created by a series of spatial, social, ethical boundaries and actually exist through the negotiation and narration of stories that take place in all spaces of the village or the city. As Gadamer claims, the principle of hermeneutics simply means that we should try to understand everything that can be understood. This research consists of a series of metaphors and interpretations, which in turn produce a series of realities, a series of truths. Archives were used with the intention to produce fiction as a way of interpreting and revealing the reality of the city or the village. The fictional stories are intellectual construct of the things that make up this reality. As stated by Malthus, narrative can be seen as structure, both memory and self, identity, as well as the places, the landscapes in which self-identity is itself worked out and established. Architecture, the spatial nature of boundaries in fiction and interpretation, can be used for a deeper and better understanding of the different realities of the village or city structure and life. It is extremely important for architects to develop an understanding based on the different experiences that take place within the village structures and which can lead to interpretations in architecture and design closer to a human way of life and closer to life's actual complexities. Concluding thoughts. Within contemporary architecture that still seeks to keep novelty in architectural projects alive in contemporary traditional societies, language and narrative forms can become tools of understanding and revealing the truth of these societies in relation to architecture and the environment. Primarily texts, related literature, contracts, testaments, verbal history connected with the place can help us understand the community and the inhabitants' perception of ownership and dwelling through a different set of metaphors and interpretations. Gadamer claims that in language, and only in it, can we meet what we never encounter in the world, because we are ourselves and merely what we mean and what we know from ourselves. This knowledge from ourselves also involves emotions. This represents another way in which, through fiction, we connect ourselves with space and the environment. This is the reason why writing a fictional narrative helps students to understand, connect, root their experience into space and the environment, allowing them to imagine life as a social and cultural interaction where place, space, and environment are involved. Today, though we gravitate towards new contemporary sustainable ways of living, we search for things beyond the human way of life, beyond the complexity of architecture. We ignore what connects us to social life, spatial qualities, and the environment. In this course, students are invited to understand this relationship between contemporary or traditional life and the complexity of architecture, place, and environment. Students become equipped with tools to understand and interpret local traditions and modern life. Narrative and fiction equip students with a way of interpreting the local tradition and culture without responding to an architecture and a way of dwelling through form and fashion, but by revealing the social and ethical function of architecture as a substantial expression, reflection of the relation between architectural tradition on the one hand and people, places, and the environment on the other. Thank you. I will be very pleased to receive your questions and comments on this presentation.